Welcome to Wise Up On Air. My name is Damian Kaspauer. I'm the software product manager here at Audiokinetic, and I'm super stoked on this episode. We're going to be going behind the scenes with the physics collection coming to Strata. I'm excited to invite some special guests here to unpack, dig into, and, talk physics, the sound of sound in the world. So thanks to folks who are joining us here today. Drop a word in the chat from time to time to let us know how you're doing, and fire off any questions as they come up. Let's take a look at a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to dig in with some introductions to our special guests waiting in the wing. We've got an overview of physics sound for folks who maybe haven't unpacked exactly what's at stake when we talk about physics. And then we're going to dig deep into the Strata Physics Collection. This is a unique offering for game sound. We'll start by defining the scope of it. How big is it? What does it cover? And then we're going to go behind the scenes into the pre-production and production of this special collection. We'll round off with information about where to grab the free samples of Strata and give you a peek at the next hands-on we have scheduled with the collection itself. So without further ado, let's welcome guests to Wise Up On Air. How's it going, everyone?
Great.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah.
Hi.
Cool.
Hi,
Great with maximum enthusiasm. A product manager with, I'm product owner with Strata. And shall I go directly into what we're doing, or do you want to have a round through of introductions? Yes, perfect.
Let's do the introductions. We'll hand it off next to Florian.
Hi there, I'm Florian Bodenschatz. I'm working at Boom as the manager for Strata. And yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you as well. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Tristan Horton. I'm was the man on the ground doing a lot of the recording, field recording, and editing and processing of the sounds that are in this library. And yeah, just so excited to be able to actually finally start talking about this, because this took up such a big chunk of my life, and all I could say to people was like, I'm working on this big project, and eventually everyone just stopped asking me what it was and just started asking me like, so how's it going with the big project? And that's finally here. We can finally start talking about what it is. Not quite out yet, but it really feels really good to start talking about it.
Well, and you said big chunk of your life, but I'm wondering, just how deep has this physics project been? Because it's almost like, the words that you're saying are infused with physics at this point.
Well, it was for me, I think, a pretty constant part of my working life for around 15, 16 months, something along those lines.
Yeah.
From inception to when I was sort of like handed over to Florian and everyone at Audiokinetic to do the final bells and whistles and polish of the project.
Awesome. And I can't wait to dig deep and unpack those months and all of the depth that's packed into this collection. But yeah, let's take a step back for a second and, Simon, give us a little overview of what we're talking about here today.
So yes, Strata, the physics collection. So let me actually navigate my mouse to the right spot.
Cool.
To allow me to be doing things. There it goes. All right. So yes. So the design of the Strata Physics Collection is based on the physics matrix of a game engine. And that sort of sets it apart from any other collection of collision sounds that you might find, because it's designed very specifically for games. and it has had a long gestation period. From conception through to release is nearly 3 years. So a lot of planning into what the scope of it would be, and then of course the execution of actually gathering the gargantuan amount of 52 gigabytes of source material, which took over a year, and then editing it all up and presenting it in the Strata format. So this collision sounds for games. So I'm going to talk you through a bit about how most game engines deal with collision sounds, and that is they take, it tends to be two sounds. In fact, there is a source sound of an object, and then there is a surface which you're colliding. Now, it could also be objects and objects colliding, and or surfaces and surfaces. But for the simplifying things and to present you more of what makes up the collection, I'm going to talk you through an object and a surface colliding. So objects. So we have the following objects in the Strata physics collection. There's these objects are commonly found, so you'll have a body, ceramic body things, cloth, glass, metal hollow, metal massive, metal pipe, plants, rocks, wood hollow, wood massive. And we're going to select ceramic as we go through this process of getting to play sounds. So we have ceramic objects, and they have size, of course, large, medium, and small. And every object has a sub-project, which is like body large, body medium, body small. And the game engine has selected large, and so we now know we've got a ceramic large size object, and then inside of every sub-project and inside of your game, you'll usually have something that determines the collision type, and these range as impact, destruction, scrape, could be slide, bend, could be roll, depends on the type of objects involved, but at least 4 collision type within every sub-project has regions for these types of impact. And of course we also have, we're going to have a destruction of a ceramic object, large object. And then we have force, and then force of course is subdivided into soft, medium, and hard. So for every type of collision type, you have a force variation of a region, whether it's soft, medium, or hard. And of course, for dramatic purposes, our game engine has chosen hard, and now it's going to play the object sound. Now we have a variation of size of these surfaces, so large, medium, and small. So that totals up to 69 sub-projects that you can choose for objects and or surfaces, being and variants of large, medium, and small for each of them. And then we're choosing a large concrete surface, and we're going to, the ceramic object is going to impact the collision type. We're going to, with the surface, it's not like I can actually destroy it, but it could be slide, it could be scrape, it could be bend, depending on the type of object and the type of collision that you're having with the surface. And of course we again have soft, medium, and hard. And for dramatic purposes, I have again selected hard, and then we'll have the sound of the concrete being impacted by a large concrete surface being impacted with a hard force. Todd. And I'm going to go move on to another slide where I'll demonstrate a much faster variation of this, where we have the objects. The game engine is selected. It's a ceramic object, and it's going to colliding with a concrete surface, and the size of those are both is large, and the collision type is destruction and impact, and the force involved is hard, and then both of the sounds play simultaneously. So you have the ceramic side of the sound and the surface side of the sound. And that pretty much sums up in a nutshell what's going on in the design of the Strata projects and the way that a game physics engine is working.
It's great. So you've got this lookup that happens between the object and the surface. Two sounds could play at that intersection, at that collision type event. And, we're used to, having a lot of parameters from the physics engine in the game driving different properties of those sounds as well. But what we've been hearing are the mixed results of these two surfaces. But the Strata collection goes deeper, because now Strata at its foundation is a multi-track sound library. So want to unpack what that means for, we just looked at the intersection and the result of these two surfaces, but what does that really mean once we're talking about Strata and multi-track?
So here is the sub-project of the ceramic large destruction. And cool. if I zoom in there, you can see that basically what we're doing here is we have a lot of different variations of destruction.
Great.
And those destruction sounds are made up of multiple layers. So that's your basic layer.
Great.
Your debris. And for internet purposes, you may or may not hear this. That was a thump.
Not a lot of subwoofer over here.
Yeah, it's fairly delicate even here. And then of course we have a bit of punch, and they combine. So we've got 14 variations of destruction. And in fact, the way we've organized things is we've got 14 variations of destruction, and then we've got another 6 adds, and these are slightly more distinctive destructions. So if you were to talk in terms of Wwise type implementation, if you took those 20 sounds and you were to put them into a
maybe a random container.
A random container. Yeah, I'll change that to being a random container.
Cool. So you're using Rewise here in conjunction with the Reaper project to get these variations over into Wwise for the game to use.
And then you might set up these 6 the ads to play less often. Shall we say a 1 in 10, a 10% chance of playing.
Sure.
And then you would have every 10 destructions, you'd have one of the add ones play, which would basically mean it would be almost impossible for you to detect the pattern of of the number of variations that you're hearing, because of the way that they add combination of the ordinary distractions, and the add ones would break up the pattern recognition that you might experience.
Right. And that's an important piece, because physics sounds are often things that we hear over and over and over again across different scenarios in the game. So having variations and being able to create that unrecognizable repetition is really core to pulling off a believable physics system. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we have set up 20 variations, but of course, because it's a multi-track, you can very easily edit the sound and generate as many different variations as you choose. You could have basically infinite variations.
Yeah.
You could add in some of your own sound if you feel that you want to add additional color, or you feel like something's missing. I mean, I think with the 50 odd gigabytes that we have of source sounds, I think inside of this sound, let's see, maybe not, maybe. Yeah, there's probably 20 odd variations of the bass sound.
Sure.
And then and every single sound has got many variations.
Right.
And we've only touched on using a few of them. So
Right. So while we're looking at the Reaper project, let's take a step into that. I know we're going to end up dissecting all of the surfaces, the recording of the sound, and we're already hearing your work, Tristan, as it has arrived in the multi-track collection. But I'm wondering, Florian, can you help give us a context for the scope of work here? I mean, Simon's showing off an incredible matrix or lookup table between objects and surfaces. Could you talk a bit about how that scope came together, how you started to envision that as part of this collection, and then maybe even some of the work in Reaper that was facilitated by Boom towards positioning it for the collection?
Sure. Yeah, as I said, it's quite exciting to be here after a few years, because the physics collection goes back almost to the beginning of the birth of Strata. So when I was approached by Boom and Axel asked me, hey, we're gonna do this multi-track library and gonna work together with Audiokinetic, and we're gonna try to have collections for possibly any game out there, any game genre. I was super excited, of course, when I started out and we looked what collections we need for this demand. There was ambience, of course, there was interface sounds, character sounds, combat sounds, but of course I wrote just one little word down: physics might come in handy. And at that time I was like, okay, just gonna write it down. It was 30, 40 libraries, maybe 50 in the beginning that we talked about. And so as I was going through every concept of those, I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I wrote down physics. So how is that gonna end up? Because I think anyone who's done a physics sort of system in a game, I guess, was always ending up with a lot of head scratching of how to gather all these different sounds and of so many different materials in a game. Have these days all these advanced environments, outside, interior, all kinds of things that can collide with each other in different forces and whatnot. So I was like, probably we're gonna end up with a big compromise. We're just gonna, try to do 5, 6, 7 materials with, I don't know, a few variations. So I'm super excited where we are now, three years later. It's just shows how amazing it is that we came to this result. So when I talked to Audiokinetic and Axel at Boom about this, I said like, so what are we going to do about the physics? And she's like, well, let's just go for it. Let's see where we're going to end up. Let's calculate this through. And so I was like, okay, well, if you say so, I'm going to go for it. So we wrote down all these materials that could collide with each other. The idea with the matrix came up as well, the objects and the surfaces. And then, of course, there's different sizes, as Simon has already shown us. And these things can roll, and they can bend, and they can break, and they can be thrown and impact and whatnot. So all in all, it was a huge matrix that we came up with. And then the question was, okay, so we've got quite a few materials, a lot of interactions that can happen between them. And of course, in games with any sound, you're also going to have a lot of variations. As we talked about, it's so important to reduce the repetition to hear a sound again. So I was like carefully writing a number down of variations to the already big list of things. And at that point in time, we were like, okay, we gotta also talk to someone else. So we reached out to a few audio directors and asked them, so guys, if there was a physics library, which there isn't at the moment, what would you want or what would you need? And that was really good for us to like just get a real world feedback from others as well, so we could see, okay, maybe we wrote down 10, 12, 16 variations, thought we were bold, but people might maybe want 20, and multiplied by all these materials, the number at the end was just getting bigger and bigger. So I was like getting a bit nervous because the rendered files, was around almost 10,000. I think we have ended up with about 9,700 rendered files. And that
I just counted it, and it was 10,045
oh,
of the
wow.
final render.
And
Rendered variation. Yeah.
And then with Strata, it's okay. Those are the rendered files for the user. That if you would click and let that run for a little bit, it would be 10,000. But you have multitrack, so if you wanted, you could, export those 4 layers, and each have their pitch randomizer and their volume randomizer on each other. So it's a lot of variations depending on your situation. But yeah, and the great thing was to bring it back the loop when I approached Axel with those numbers and this huge list of collection, like we were like, and we talked to Boom and Audiokinetic, and the thing was, let's go for it, and there was, wow, that is so cool. We're gonna do this for real. And we're going to have a lot of work, but we're going to have a lot of fun. And at some point, we're going to have a physics live stream, and
Perfect.
It's just been a really great journey that we've been able to come to this point. And
that's great.
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting in there. Every time you add a new object or surface, not only does it add that content, but it adds the content for all the other surface interactions as well. So it goes deep. And one thing I just wanted,
the matrix. I did a calculation of the matrix, and it's actually 828
combinations, yeah.
Intersections of,
Yeah.
Say body, large, impact, soft, body, large, impact, medium, hard. So just the matrix is 828 combinations,
Cool.
which is quite a few.
That's great. And Florian, you touched on this, but I'll surface a question from the chat to you. With that level of granularity, right? All of those layers, there's concern about hitting a voice count limit depending on the type of game. What are the opportunities with the Strata Physics collection for optimization considerations for games that might not be able to support playing 4 to 5 layers for a surface and an object simultaneously? How does the Strata Physics collection address that?
So obviously, like we want to provide enough scope of sounds to have the maximum allowed voices being possible. But I've also been working on games where you have like maybe 3 megabytes per level. Simon Pressig and others of you probably had way harder limitations than that. But it's kind of been for a bigger game the smallest I had to deal with so far. And there was a little physics system in there, and I wish I had access to the Strata physics library back then. Even if I had to very much limit myself in how many variations and maybe how many materials I can use. The good thing with physics sound is, I guess, they are, at least the impact and destruction sounds quite short in nature. So that helps. I guess if you wanted to use it, you wouldn't need to use 20 variations, but you could go a bit down. And of course, with Wwise, you have all the possibilities of limiting sounds to maybe playing only a certain number of sounds per material, per collision type, and also how many surfaces play at once. So I would reckon there would be, I think with this collection, you have all the possibilities, and then you would need to see on which corners and edges are you gonna limit it, so you have, I say, a compromise of performance for your game with your individual restrictions. On the other side, as good as a sound that you can make with those restrictions. But at least you won't not run into trouble of having to find your sources for that task, which we can maybe touch on later, because I think that's quite interesting of how creating physics sounds has been possibly before this library collection. Sorry.
Yeah.
So there are lots of so the actual size of the rendered collection is actually quite small. Percentage. I think it's only about 2 gigabytes for the 10,000 files, and they're rendered at 96K 24-bit. So when you could actually have the entire physics collection probably in a modern day console situation. You could certainly have all of the impacts and destructions loaded into memory, and then for the sounds which are longer, like the loops for scraping and sliding and rolling, they could be streamed in. So it's surprising how even though the collection is huge in terms of what you've got in terms of source, but how small it actually comes down to when you actually optimize that for your game scenario. You probably don't have all of the surfaces or all of the sizes, and it gets
Right.
You can scale down.
And those rendered tracks are collapsed wave files of those multiple tracked variations, and those just come out of the box when you download the Strata Physics collection, and they're ready to use as is. Like, you don't have to do anything over in Reaper to just jump in and get dirty with physics across all of these rendered material types surfaces and objects. It's that when you need to take it a step further, you need to design something that's specific for your game, or you're looking to increase the variations to really explode the exponential opportunity that all of those layers bring, that you then, can work with the Reaper projects to customize it for your game and for whatever needs it has.
Yes, I mean it's we've got arbitrary sizes, but there's no reason why you couldn't go much more granular and sort of redesign the assets to give you very large or super tiny, and all of any combination in between.
Yeah.
And the same with forces and so forth. If you wanted to have a very, very over the top large sounds and very very tinkly little small sounds, you could modify it and come up with a completely different set of sounds that matched your particular end use case scenario, I think.
It's at the core of Strata to give designers that flexibility with the content while providing the simplicity of reaching for the rendered output, but then having those different pieces that comprise those to dig into. And it's all the way down to, the layers as you showed. It's also, I know, the DSP chain, different EQs, different ways that that those have been prepared for the Reaper project. So there's a lot in the box there. But I want to highlight something that you said there, Simon, because I think this is going to get really interesting. You started talking about tiny pieces, right? And I think that there's something here about just what we're talking about, because when we're talking sound, when we think tiny, we think of short duration. And I know that this physics collection goes all the way down to tiny little grains of sand and little rocks. So I'm going to see if Tristan can lend us some perspective on this size piece of what we're talking about, and really give us a scope on when we talk about an object. Like, where does it start? What are your considerations? And how big and how small are we talking about?
There's quite a lot to consider in terms of like how we approached all of these different assets, and we can drill down into that a lot more. But yeah, it really was challenging to figure out the right like level of detail to go down to in terms of like how like the relative size of the different elements, from the smallest to the largest, and also then you're working with soft, medium, and hard, so you've got to work really closely to have like really high fidelity in terms of like signal to noise ratio. With if you're recording a small thing, a very small object at a very soft sort of force level, you've got to make sure that you're getting that nice and cleanly. So your microphone selection and your recording technique is very, very important there. And then that's so we go from very, very small items being performed very, very quietly, all the way up to I had to sort of figure out what was the biggest sort of object or surface implement that I could reliably sort of manipulate to do all those impacts or looping sounds to maintain consistency. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it goes from itty bitty to like really big, and then also quite a lot of layering and DSP to sort of accentuate that even further.
Right, but down to that source piece, and I know we're just scratching the surface on this. See what I did there? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. We had talked about how this will be just one endless physics joke, so I'm happy to keep that going. Uh, you know, it's the pebble example. So you're all the way down to like I got a single rock and I'm dropping it on different surfaces to get the material interaction for something of that size, all the way up to, what's the biggest rock that I can drop on a thing repeatably. And that's a key, right? Because this Foley or field recording, it's a performance, right?
Yeah, very, very, very much so. And there was a lot of experimentation in terms of the performance, in terms of selecting the materials. I think we're talking about the final collection is what's in the region of 52 sort of source files within the project. But I think my source recordings were somewhere north of 700 gigs worth of material that I had to whittle down to what was needed and useful for the library. I mean, there's lots we can dig into there. It's I mean, you have your 20 variations. Yeah, another pun. There's your sort of 20 variations of every sort of size and force level. And I think my sweet spot that I realized was somewhere, depending on the material itself, somewhere in the region of sort of 40 to 60 takes of each one, so that I could then go back. This is sort of after doing it a few times and coming back and editing and realizing that's the sort of sweet spot of then being able to go and when editing it, finding those really sort of the ones that all work and all consistent, and then put those into the project.
Yeah, consistency is one thing, uniqueness is another thing, and you're trying to find the balance with, you're out there in the world, you're capturing all these variations, but then you get back to the desktop and you're like, that one sounds exactly the same, exactly the same, exactly the same, a little bit different. Okay, cool. Yeah. So you're trying to find those performances or the capture of that interaction and really build out the best selection.
Yes, it's pretty much like the Three Bears. It's not too much variation, a little bit of variation, or not enough. You're just like, oh, that one sounds exactly the same. I can't use that one. Got to move. You're going through selecting. Oh yes, this one. Or that one's got too much character. That will make an up. We'll use that for an add variation, and going on and finding all of those, I'm sure was quite a lot of work.
You've sort of hit on what I view as the probably the single biggest challenge of this project was mitigating decision fatigue. There's so many assets, and obviously like that's, I'm doing 40 to 60 for each of the sounds, but there's then probably like 4 different materials that I've recorded for that, and if there's the initial process of weeding out which are the good takes, and then it's also then the decisions of combining those together and all of that sort of stuff. So I really had to work quite hard to like figure out ways of not fatiguing myself with all those decisions being made through the process. I did that by trying to very much scheduling it so that it was recording and editing interspliced with each other, as well as making that sort of having intermittent sort of deliveries of certain sets of sounds for Florian to and Simon to go through and give feedback on. But yeah, that was probably the main technique of like just breaking the workload up, so I'm not sitting there just trying to make thousands of decisions day on and day out in two bigger chunks.
Breaking chunks. See what you did there?
It's inevitable.
It's all physics.
It is. Yeah, sound is physics. Wow. Yeah, so I'm putting up some pictures from the rock side of this equation and illustrating a bit of the different size considerations. Do you want to talk about, how, is this a good place to start?
Any place to start is a good place to start. You've got to start. yeah, I think there's quite a few things actually. Just looking at those photographs, I think the rock one was one of the first sets that I started to do. But I think it also illustrates that, like, part of the pre-production process, after sort of getting my head around the sound book and actually thinking, can this be done? Is this crazy idea actually possible? And then just realizing I've got to go for it, because as I look back on the projects that I've worked on, it's always the ones that really pushed your limits and pushed you out of your comfort zone that you have the fondest memories of. So I was like, okay, great. Like, listen to that voice in your head and push through. But one of the considerations in this sort of pre-production was what assets or what sort of types of materials can be done in the studio where there's a lot more control, which of them need to be done out in the field, and figuring that out took a big chunk of time to sort of mentally just work through it all. And then you could sort of see that I did a couple of sessions of exterior in a quarry, recording different impacts and that sort of thing. And then I think the one on the sort of bottom right, if my screen is correct, is one of the smaller sounds in studio. And you can see there's you can see an array of different microphones there, which I actually ended up simplifying a little bit, because that ended up adding far more decisions to the decision tree of how many microphones do you have there, because there's also what's it called, a LOM geophone. You can see plugged into that sort of bag full of rock pieces. So yeah, using microphones, using contact mics where applicable.
Well, and you said, about 40, 50 variations for each, cell on the lookup table. But then now multiply that by the number of microphones that are capturing it. So I can see why you would want to limit that at the front, so you didn't have an exponential amount of content for a single variation performance.
Absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
And of course, with different materials, you've got different microphones which work, combinations that work better than others. So it isn't as if you actually make one decision of, I'm going to record it all with this microphone. It was, I'm going to record this surface with this microphone, and now I'm doing metal beams, for example, where you were telling how you had experimented with different microphones to help you get size as across in terms of impact and things like that.
Yeah, I would think the one constant microphone across everything was the Sanken CO100K, because I knew from the get-go that there would be a lot of sort of pitch manipulation, because I'm just as much as I try, I can't lift sort of 3-ton boulders above my head and smash it against the ground 40 or 50 times to get all the impact. So I knew that there would be some fudging of the truth a little bit to get the size I needed. So the Sanken was there the entire time, and there's a combination of mostly sort of the Sennheiser 8000 series, and then the geophone. I also used some Barkus Berry plain old waves on a couple of things, which we can discuss as we go along. Trying to figure out the right combination of those is always a fun challenge.
Yeah, that's great. We're really starting to get into the dirt, and if folks out there who are tuned in have questions, specifications, if you need us to spell something, just drop her in the chat. We'll carry it to the conversation. And really just trying to, really unpack and dig this collection, because, it goes deep. Now, another consideration we've been talking about kind of behind the scenes here is the interior versus exterior locations. And when I'm saying those words, I'm thinking about reflections. I'm thinking about context, right? How much of that did you actively seek out to try and inform these sounds with the space that you were recording in, or the opposite? You know, how did you remove that, or how were you making those decisions to get the cleanest recording out of things?
Okay, I'm gonna take us back one step, I think,
Oh,
to
cool.
answer that question, because yeah, it really became also about like what is the most functional form of that sound, and for that to happen, I needed to understand the medium of translation, and I'll make an admission that I'm very much more a field recordist and a content sound designer. I'm not I understand what middleware is doing, but not that deeply that I've ever done sort of any implementation or programming. And at the outset, after Axel had sort of explained what the system was going to be, I realized that I needed to get a much deeper understanding of how these sounds are going to function within Wwise. And so I then just did a pretty deep dive into all the fantastic content that you put out on the Audiokinetic website, onto the YouTube channel, and also other sort of people that have done a lot of tutorial videos, just to get a much deeper understanding of how these are going to be used. And it's actually really lovely to hear you in sort of real speed. You put out too much content. I have to listen to it all at least 1.5 or 2 to get through it. I didn't have years to like work my way through it in real time.
I can talk faster if that makes it easier for you.
That sounds much more familiar. But yeah, so then realizing that there's a lot of considerations for that. The sounds actually need to be really like, yeah, because Wwise does such an amazing job of spatializing audio and doing sort of like the sort of accurate sort of distancing and occlusions and all those sorts of things, that I needed to make sure that the sounds would work whether the player walks like right up to the sound and puts their sort of nose on the sound, and you needed that like high fidelity, like really sort of close perspective, and then the engine would work out like, okay, the player's further away and now it sounds further away. So everything was yeah, with that sort of the end goal in mind. Yeah, and I think that's really
Yes,
yeah,
so
sort of
maintaining
guided me through a lot of it.
so it was very important that the collection maintained a very constant perspective, so that when you implement them into the engine, you can have one curve for pretty much for every type of physics object, and its perspective is going to play well, because they all come back to that, with that very constant sound when you're very close, and so that it'll work nicely as you design your roll-off curves. And
Yeah,
that's one of
absolutely.
the key things that separates this collection from other collections, where you're trying to combine sounds from different collision sources, and they're recorded at different perspectives, and then you're trying to mix and match them up to get them to play nice in a game perspective. And you spend a lot of time trying to do that. So the physics collection really addressed that right from the start, and that's why we went for such a broad set of sounds, so that that broad set of sounds would have a very, very consistent quality across them all, which makes the whole implementation of it easier to do. And the whole, if you want to start playing around with the sounds, you can do that, apply very consistent changes to the sounds, and they're all going to become modifiable easily.
Yeah. I like to think
I
about.
don't.
Okay, go ahead, please.
No, sorry. I didn't want to deviate too much off or to go too much of a tangent, but you've kind of segued again, like into one of the other big challenges that I faced in doing this is that, especially for the looping sounds, the sort of scraping and bending and that sort of stuff. If you go through a lot of other libraries and you look up sort of a concrete scrape or a rock scrape, and you find it, and it's usually this lovely sort of, it can vary in lengths, but it has this Doppler as the material scrapes along the ground or whatever it is and goes past the microphone. But that's not how Wwise is going to do that Doppler in the right spatialization. I need to make sure that loop it's from that same perspective, that and that was a big challenge of trying to get these moving
And it's a
looping
constant
sounds.
speed, yes.
Yeah, moving on, and the microphone needs to stay in the same relative position to where the sound source is coming from. So that was a head scratcher for sure.
And we do have slow, medium, and fast speeds of those.
Yes, as well. But consistently slow and consistently fast.
At this point, I was been almost like, wanting to weigh in on the consistency factor. I think it's really a key aspect of the library. Not only like, in between the variations, because these 20 variations, as we touched upon before, need to have consistency in themselves. And no matter if those are little impact short sounds or the looping, scrape or rolling sounds, all very consistent, no matter how many variations. But then also the consistency, from one material to the next, also in volumes. And so that you can, as we touched on earlier before, you can throw these into Wwise, all these different materials, but you can apply similar or the same, roll off and other things, and it will work. So to have the ease of working with so much material, and be able to like quickly and easily implement something that used to be quite hard, and I think that consistency ties in with that story that before you hadn't one source of library that you could use. You had to like look for any kind of sounds. You were thinking like, okay, I need to do metal. So you type in your metal impacts and destructions, and you find 3 variations for breaking things, and you find 12 variations of impacts, but they might not be very consistent. So you're gonna sit down and load them all in and adding all these effects to create some consistency. So I think the value of having so much material that is consistently done with the same intention and the same purpose, I think is just so valuable to this library.
Totally. I'm going to drop a couple of my favorite physics words here because I don't know that I've heard them yet. And the words are mass and velocity. And a lot of times these are the properties that we can get from the physics simulation. So we can get the mass or how big or how dense something is. Like this is something that is usually part of a physics system on the game side. Velocity being how fast is it moving?
So I can jump in there and just say that, so for us, size is mass and force is sort of velocity. We also have for some things like the loops, we have this velocity in terms of fast, medium, and slow, which I didn't go into in my diagram, but there is also that other set of switches. So if you're building a blend container for transitioning between slowly pushing a big block and then gaining speed up to medium speed and then starting to run, you've got slow, medium, and fast variations of the loop, and you can crossfade between those. And because they are so consistent, building that blend container is very much easier than, say, you're actually taking a more linear made library where you've got someone starts pushing something and they're constantly accelerating, and you're trying to choose the bits of it that, okay, well, that's going to be my slow loop bit there, and that's going to be my medium bit there, and
But
so forth.
and the rock is, whilst it's rolling down the hill, it
Mhm.
starts on carpet and then gets muddy and then lands in water. It's
Yes, so the whole you're bouncing, you're impacting with a whole slew of different surfaces. You start off on snow at the top of the mountain, and then you go into rock, and then you go into forest. And as you transition through each one of those, you're blending, and you've got that consistency of the quality across all of those loops. That eats up so much time if you try and use any other library.
Yeah.
And
Great comment from the chat. The speed consistencies of the loop recordings we're talking about here shows how this library was designed for games. Many libraries for linear don't have this level of accuracy. Thanks, Phil Reload, for that comment. Yes, absolutely, right? That is the point. We have gone to these lengths because we know that that's a missing piece out there for folks who are trying to solve these problems, whether it's the rock rolling down the hill, or in a specific experience, tires on different surfaces in games. This is another problem that developers have to solve time and time again. And whether you're doing it for cars or whether you're doing it for boulders, you have the same considerations, concerns, and it is all physics at some point.
Should I dish the secret sauce to some of the looping elements?
Yeah.
yes,
I can dish the
Yes,
secret
yeah.
sauce, and it's it links back to like how so all your content on the web, on the YouTube channel, and how like information and sort of ideas are shared so freely within the sort of audio community. I actually love that about the community. That techniques and ideas are shared so widely and just with such transparency, and there's wonderful stuff on the Audiokinetic YouTube channel. And it's also about like all these ideas are building on the shoulders of giants, and two of them obviously there's Ben Burt and Randy Tom, and there's things that they've shared over the years that I've just sort of absorbed and synthesized. So one of them was I think it's Ben Burt's one where he's talking about, if you want to get like a sound going of a certain material, like you can put it to a bicycle tire and just keep that spinning around and around and around, and your microphone can be right there, and you can have that sound. But that brought up a problem of in this library, because it's a matrix of different interactions. It couldn't be that all of the looping sounds had some sort of rubbery, tirey sound going on inside of that sound, because those could add up, and you could really start to hear like, oh, that's a Schwab sort of city tire or something like that. So what I ended up doing for quite a few of these things is I ended up making a rotating turntable. A really good friend of mine sort of made it with a really quiet industrial, what are those things that go in the wheels? I've forgotten now.
Some kind of gear or motor, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not a gear motor. It's the what is it inside it? It's inside like a skateboard truck.
Oh, like a bearings.
Yeah.
The bearings.
A bearing, that's
okay.
the word. Sorry, it's a bit later. A bearing, like a big industrial bearing that's really quiet. And initially I had like a belt system going around it with a little crank that I could like control the speed. But then I'm like, okay, I put a big flat rock on there, and I'm like rolling the rock around, and that just doesn't work. And I went through various iterations to try and figure out how that would work. And eventually what I came down to is I ended up putting a big 20 kilogram sort of weight plate that bodybuilders would use, so that I could spin it up and it would have enough momentum that I could then create friction loops out of that recording. And then sort of taking like Randy Tom has this theory that he's talked about he believes that I hope this is the right quote, that a rolling sound is actually just a series of impacts, and I haven't really managed to get that right. He's got some other techniques that he hasn't shared with how to get that working, but I sort of use that idea of taking these pieces of the turntable recordings, and then within Radium Sampler, in SoundMiner, creating little instruments and playing those. Playing those in a patch that I designed. So they play like one after the other in a very sort of like consistent manner, because you almost need to have a shepherd tone sort of sound if it's rolling or scraping, but that's sort of the shepherd tone of the octaves coming in one after the other and fooling you into thinking that it's a constantly rising sound. But obviously these materials aren't necessarily all tonal, so you can't do that technique. So it was a combination of those sort of elements and a lot of like playing. So there's a performance of recording the sounds and then playing them back to try and create all these useful looping elements.
And was that granular at all, or were you just like sample playback, randomization, looping? Like, how deep did your patch go?
It wasn't granular, because I don't think the granular module was out yet, or the granular sampling in Salman. It was very much to do with initially editing the source recordings to go like, okay, this is a useful part, and then it was then not like no something very little pitch variation within it, because you don't want it to all of a sudden have something that's out of pitch. So it's selecting them so they all are relatively in the same pitch, and then just offsetting the sort of start time so that you don't get any like phasing of any of these sort of sounds.
Right.
So it wasn't super technical on the patching, but it was quite a lot of experimentation and playing and finding the sections that really worked.
Yeah. The cool piece about this technique and the library in general, right, is that there may be a perception that someone just goes out with a microphone and starts pushing rocks down the hill and like voila, physics collection, right? But we're talking about a highly designed, purpose-built for interactive collection that is designed, right? There are design elements, not just from microphone selection, making sure you're capturing the quality of the sound up front, the performance piece, and then carrying it into different tools to be able to shape it, whether it's your experiments with looping it and creating systems of playback for loops, or whether it's once we get into the Reaper project and tuning these layers and accentuating, I think you said at some point, the different characters of these surface types.
And I also mention another thing that is quite interesting, is that these sounds do make very good source for the Wwise physics impactor, where you can do some granular resynthesis and produce new surfaces and variation of them, and that's quite an interesting step. And because it's such good source material for the granular synthesizer to be able to extract information from, because of its consistency, you can expand your number of objects and your scale of objects and your surfaces, and you can do that in real time using Impacto, which is really quite cool.
Yeah, so for
And
folks who haven't heard
you
it,
can also,
folks who haven't heard of Impactor, it's an optional plugin that you can install that does cross synthesis for, as Simon is saying, for impact sounds. So it pulls them apart and puts them back together with greater flexibility and greater variation. And I think you were talking about as well our SoundSeed Grains plugin,
yes,
also an
which,
optional plugin.
and you can of course use those plugins and record their output and bring them back into Reaper and do things. If you don't even want or need to use them in runtime, they are very powerful tools for sound generation, and I've used them quite a bit
But there's
to do that. Where my runtime maybe didn't allow, and I didn't have enough CPU available to be able to run those plugins as optimally as I might like.
Right.
there's also there's maybe some slightly hidden alternate versions within the Strata library, because within the physics library, because one of the considerations that I sort of work through thinking about this is that the sounds need to sort of be able to play for the widest range of foreseeable sort of surfaces. So, for instance, maybe like the glass impacts or the glass hits and that sort of stuff. It could be a pane of glass or it could be a glass vessel. So, in a lot of those sort of projects, I've recorded both types of sounds and sort of blended them together. So it's somewhere like out of the box, you could play it with either one of those sounds, and if you see it happening, and there's that sort of like where your vision and your hearing sort of blur the lines a little bit, and it'll be believable. But if you want to go down into the different projects and then extend and open up the hollow sounds and sort of go, you can even go in and find yourselves sort of like a more vessel like glass or vase sort of sound and a more pane of glass sound. You can go in like even with sort of like the wood with the hollow, especially with the hollow wood. Some like depending on the size, the hollowness and the thickness of the wood determines how long it rings out for. And I've sort of tried to find a very happy medium place of that, but there is like a whole bunch of tail in a lot of those sort of hollow recordings. So if you really are doing, I don't know, sort of like something set on a ship where there's lots of like barrels or like old wooden doors or something that needs a lot more sort of resonance, you can go in there and just pull out the tail that I've just sort of like faded out a little bit early, so you can go in and start designing to your heart's intent. That's just without before you start resorting to granulating anything.
Yeah, and design is right. Are there any other Easter eggs that we should be looking for? And I'm thinking specifically about, you're talking about as you drill into the layers of these materials, like you could be listening to, a surface or a material, and it could have a component that you wouldn't expect, because again, what you're going for the best representation of that interaction, which, like you said, might have a wine glass as part of a glass breaking or a panel of glass breaking. I think back famously to, I think it was Saving Private Ryan, where there's like a chicken cluck in the middle of an explosion, right? Like, are there any wild Easter eggs that people should be digging for that they might find tucked in around the edges? All right.
Yeah, I don't like proper Easter eggs. No, not really. I kept it quite quite yeah, down the line with a lot of those sort of stuff.
No,
There's more.
no,
It's more that
no,
there is
no,
just more.
no chickens were harmed in this.
No chickens were harmed.
correction.
I did startle. Well, it actually startled me. A red deer. Yeah. Actually, this whole library came together over a very busy time of my life, and I ended up relocating from South Africa to the Netherlands halfway through the project. So I also planned various different things in the different countries which would be able to sort of record. And I was like, okay, well, I know the Netherlands pretty well. I know they have some really lovely old forests, and that was one of the sounds that I was like, right, I don't want to do like a forest bed in the studio, because that's just going to be messy, and it's just actually not going to really sort of be that convincing. So it was sort of fairly new to living in the Netherlands. Went out into the forest that you can see there. So I was recording in this wonderful old forest with this really deep. It's this sort of like a deep leaf bed that hasn't been disturbed for many years, and it has the leaves are not so crackly. They've deteriorated a little bit, and there's a resonance to that deep bed. And I was doing a long session in the sort of evening. I think I knew that I was doing like some very delicate sort of soft sounds. So I was using a Sennheiser MKH 70, which is probably the quietest mic that I own. I know that I could get those details. And I was doing very delicate sort of debris sounds, and I'd been standing very still, so I didn't make any sounds that I'd have to edit out later. So I'd stayed very still, and then I was listening back again on my headphones, listening to what I just recorded, standing very still, and I had the gain of the headphones really cranked up, so I could really hear like if there was like what was going on. And I switched off the playback, and I stood up, and a red deer had wandered close to me because I'd been so quiet. And it gave an alarm call at such a loud volume, and it just distorted the headphone amp, and scared me, because I was like, what is this like crazy demonic animal that I'm hearing that's now shouting at me in the forest as night is falling? But that was totally about the worst in terms of animal interactions on this library.
And you
Save that
one for yourself for your ringtone now, right? It didn't go in the library. It's just when
that was the disappointing part, is that I wasn't recording because I'd just been previewing back, and I just pressed stop, so I missed that completely.
That's a great story.
That reminded me of I was out cross country skiing, and it was getting late, and I was heading home, and in the woods I was hearing these slight sounds, and they were coming quite regularly, and I was like, what the hell is that? I'm skiing a bit faster, and it took me about 2 kilometers to realize that it was snow falling off the branches of the trees and whomping down, but it sounded like this huge giant footsteps. And I'd been listening to a podcast of a thing, and totally freaked me out.
That's great.
I did feel a lot of pressure, like I felt a lot of pressure doing the snow recordings to send that over to a Canadian company. As nice as Canadians are, like you guys know snow, and I wanted to make sure that I captured that as accurately as I could for someone that comes from a subtropical southern hemisphere city.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's got a sound all its own, doesn't it?
It is very we there's lots of different sounds of snow, and I think we've found captured a great. It's very convincing snow sounds, and it's also quite flexible. It's fairly easy. I've experimented with dialing it to be softer or harder, and so you can simulate the variation of snow conditions that you might be encountering.
Yeah, that was definitely part of the pre-production of going like, okay, what are the elements of snow that like would fit into that, like the crunch and the sort of powdery sounds, and yeah, that was definitely one that really benefited from a lot of planning, thinking it through.
Another place where that consistency really pays off, as you mentioned, Simon, being able to take and tune a sample set and get that variation that you need for softer, harder, crunchier, just a great way to establish that up front. One thing we haven't talked about that I want to make sure we do talk about is metal and metal bending. And how do you get that, the feeling of, I'm assuming you're not bending metal with your bare hands, but what was your strategy to try and capture that part of the collection?
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I was scratching my head against, or like for when sort of trying to figure it out, and I knew that there was certain sort of metal friction sound that if you sort of treat them and then layer them with some other sort of sounds can really sort of be a convincing metal sound, because that is a bit of a suspension of disbelief, right? You don't you do get metal bending and it makes a sound through a resonant body, but metal itself doesn't normally make too much of a sound when you try to bend it. And it's yeah, so hopefully that's relatively convincing. Like in game, you'll get the sense that it's bending, and that was the core of that sound was actually a fairly serendipitous discovery. I identified. You can see those pieces in the pictures there of I in scouting locations. I had just and a couple of years ago discovered this slightly eccentric tractor repairman out in sort of the countryside, who basically has this gigantic farm, and he has basically a metal scrapyard in the back for all these parts that he uses to fix like old tractors. Contacted him, went up and sort of like just found this playground of just random bits of metal. You can see there's a picture of an I-beam that has a piece welded onto it, so that was great because that created a bit of a cavity that resonated, so you could get a bit more depth. But the core of that the metal bending sound was there was a piece of flat bar that had been bended into a weird sort of L shape, and it was just resting against a sort of gas cylinder. And I thought, oh, that looks like an interesting piece of metal to like hit or do whatever. And as I picked it up, it rubbed against the side of the gas cylinder and just made this amazing sort of friction sound. And so I spent like just mic'd that up, put contact microphones on, and spent several hours just like at different velocities, different sort of intensities and speeds, like going up and down with this piece of flat bar against the gas cylinder. And that really was totally serendipitous. I tried to do that on other sort of metal objects, and I didn't ever get that sort of like same deep resonant like really. I heard it and I was like, that sounds like metal bending. I was like, this is amazing. It was
That's great.
That was a very not 100% sure how I would have solved that problem if I hadn't discovered that.
I mean, the sound has an incredible sense of tension in it. It was like, oh, that really gives me that sense of that it's going to break, it's going to break, it's going to break. It's like,
That's great.
the
That must
tension
have
of it is
been
fantastic.
that must have just been the perfect location, like quiet, open field, like perfect location for recording.
Yeah,
Tristan?
it was, and I did a recce. I did like a plan. I knew I needed a couple of days there, so did the initial recce and then planned everything. And yeah, it's wonderful, sort of like in the countryside, very very sort of like quiet, lots of sort of like material and sort of places to sort of duck behind. And on the first proper day arrived with somebody who was helping me sort of move, like load and carry things. All my gear arrive, and the farm next door was having the loudest, biggest sort of sweet 16th party with an outdoor disco, like pumping speakers. And he was like, "Oh yeah, okay, best laid plans." Like it seemed perfect when I was here a couple of days ago, and just like, what are you gonna do? Like, sorry, can you stop your party so that I can record some things that go bang and boom, and
It's the
it's like,
physics
okay,
Strata collection, okay?
and like, okay, we'll rain check this, but yeah, the eccentric tractor repairman was yeah, super amenable and super generous and allowing us to
But
come back a couple of other times.
it's so strange that you say that, because my next door neighbor behind the property where I live in the countryside, is almost exactly the same. He's got he's a big engine repair person, and he's got a huge sprawling garage scrapyard thing full of all sorts of stuff.
You need to take your mics there. You need to take your mics and go and record.
Well, I did. It did cross my mind that I might be able to contribute to the physics library. Should need, if needs must.
There you go.
But
You've mentioned contact microphones a couple times. I know we're looking at the loam here that you've got attached to that metal I-beam that you mentioned. You also mentioned another one. And what, for folks out there who haven't dug into contact microphones, what they are, what you can expect from them, like, what are they?
Well, yeah, contact microphones are, I think they're technically transducers, and they pick up the physical vibration within a material. So rather than a microphone picking up the movement of air particles from the sound that object is making, they're actually attached to the object, and are picking up the internal vibrations within that. So I mean, yeah, with the metal, it works incredibly well, and that the LOM is great because it has a magnetic attachment point. Although I did have it, like with a lot of the hard hits, it could sometimes get dislodged. So next version, they could make an upgraded, stronger magnet for us crazy people that love to hit metal really hard. I also use that in combination with a planar Barksbury planar waves, which is actually a system designed to record pianos. Like, you're supposed to attach them to the body of a piano, and it gives you a very dry sound. They're incredibly useful for all kinds of sound design work. They can sound very, very different to how you expect them to sound. Yeah, depending on what you've connected to.
Frequency response, is it similar as far as what you get from those?
So the LOM is a sort of like a special case, because it is essentially designed as a geophone to like pick up sensitivity, pick up sounds in the ground. So that was very helpful for dirt and gravel and those sorts of things, to add a little thump. But it is really sort of like lower frequencies. I think its upper sort of reaches about 1 kilohertz or so, and then it falls off quite steeply from there. And so using that to like really sort of like build in the bottom end of the sound, and in a lot of cases, sort of the sub layers within the projects would have been generated from that. The Barksbury is sort of auditory range, but it does sort of like curve off its sort of more mid-rangey. And one of the applications that I use this for a lot is for sort of things that don't necessarily have their own like resonance, like a rock, unless you find two sort of like cupped rocks or a rock with a hole in it, that it doesn't have that much resonance. And to try and give the sense of size, one of the techniques I employed was to use sort of resonator boxes. So these would be normally made out of wood, fairly heavily dampened on the inside, because you don't want them to necessarily have the tonality of wood, but you want some sort of like transfer of the sound of the rock, for example, into that wood, to give it more resonance and more body, and sort of sell the idea of it being a lot bigger than it is. And yeah, I found using those contact mics attached directly to the resonator box, gave really useful content to sort of blend in with the actual microphones to really sort of like sell the mass of the object.
Yeah, well, and with the collection, it's all there, right? So you can pick it apart, find your favorite pieces, grab a chunk from here, put it over there, use physics as part of other designed elements. But I think the cool piece of this is just how much there is to it. Like you're saying, this resonant piece, right? You hear that character of the object expressed through it tonally. And yeah, I love the idea of being able to make choices about that in the project. How much of that do you want as part of your physics for your game? And being able to dial that in specifically. And that leads me to the question about, so you've done the recording, and I'm dying to know, is surfboard one of the surfaces?
Is surfboard one of the surfaces? No,
Because there's
I'm
one
trying to think.
behind
There's
you.
one,
And
there's one in the that's one in the background. I'm trying to think now. I know I recorded it. I'm not sure if I actually ended up using it.
So if you're a developer out there and you're making a surfing game and you need physics sounds, let us know. This is the feedback we're looking for.
I mean, as far as expanding the physics collection, if you let us know about specific objects that you need, we'll be, happy to add them to the list of things that we go out and record. And I'd say that if you took wood hollow and you just did a little bit of playing around with it, you get a very good like wood hollow medium or small. You'd probably be able to get a pretty good surfboard out of that, I'd say, from my experience of surfing, where most of the time it's covered by white noise anyway, so of the sea.
Fair enough.
So
sorry, just touching on white noise, that's also a very like big consideration of the you have all these sounds. That was one of the things that I try to be very aware of managing, that you have all these sounds that layer up from all the sort of like emitters, and you can have tons of things happening. So having that, making sure that there's not too much there's no like you don't get those buildups of white noise, especially in the sort of like higher frequencies. Was that stuff can build up quite quickly. So we work I worked pretty hard to make sure that there wasn't.
It is very clean. Yeah, you did a beautiful job. The recordings are really as good as any I've ever heard. I really wonderful recordings. And as you said, like when you're building sounds up with multiple layers, noise quickly can become a factor. And again, using great mic pre's and really good microphones where your noise floor is low and all that sort of stuff really goes into making sure you've got pristine stuff to work with, which makes it so much more flexible.
On that note, I think also you have, if you have that big, building collapse, Tyrannosaurus Rex running into a factory situation where things are flying around, and you have multiple sources playing at the same time. This library is not only, we've designed it with the game and all the things that could potentially happen in mind, but it's a perfect collection to add to your already big sound library, to have on your disposal for any impacts you want to make. You want to have some impacts of all kinds of different materials. Even in the linear world, you've got a crash or whatever happening, you just go into your browser, and it's also all UCS conform, so you look for impacts, wood and stuff like this. Boom, there, 20 variations, large, medium, small. What do I want? It's quite, I think it's very handy also for situations outside of the physics game world.
Oh yeah, I mean, nothing precludes using it in linear media, and I mean, it totally works. And of course, you can go from that long shot of an explosion down to the very fine detail of the little bits of debris falling down around you, and you've got every aspect of the sound that you could possibly need to build a truly convincing linear thing with a lot of linear sound design with a lot of flexibility.
And I know we're getting close to the end, but let's unpack the term UCS. You dropped it there, Florian, for a second, and I just want to take a moment of pause on it because it's super significant and at the core of all of the Strata collections. So who wants to take the opportunity to unpack UCS? Tristan, I'll hand it to you, please.
So I'll start with a small anecdote of because when we started doing this, UCS had been around for a little while, and I was actually on the sort of final work group with Tim Nielsen, because I think it's a sort of evolution of a system that they started to use at Skywalker Ranch, and he wanted to make it universal. So I sort of worked there with 14 or 15 people from around the globe during lockdown, all at home, sort of brainstorming, like, how do we make the system that we can identify just from the file name itself, like, what do we need so that it's easy to find sounds across various different sound libraries.
Categories
different categories and subcategories. So the core of it is the cat ID, which is sort of like an eight letters in a sort of format that incorporates the category and then the subcategory, and then you have your effects name after an underscore with all the details, and so that is the core of the UCS, and it's I mean, there's I think when we started this library, we hadn't really discussed that, and I think at some point, maybe a third of the way in, Florian came back to me and he said, I've got a bit of bad news. We're going to need to conform all the source files to UCS, and he had no idea that I'd worked on it before, because I'd from the start, when I'm doing this in UCS, so I was like, cool, no problem. It's already in that format. Go, we don't have to redo anything. We don't have to rename like a couple hundred files now. It's all good. But it's wonderful. Yeah, when we were sort of in that final stage of like pushing this system out into the world, we were like, okay, we think it's a great system, but it's only going to become universal if it reaches critical mass, if it gets this sort of like escape velocity. And there's been lots of library developers or producers taking it on, But when I realized that Audiokinetic was getting behind it, I was like, okay, this is it. It's got a chance at really fulfilling its promise.
I've worked on a lot of games, and I think I've worked on about 70 of them, and I think I've probably encountered more than 70 naming conventions. and that, so when we started to design Strata, I immediately said, right, well, we've got UCS has finally arrived. This is the one naming convention to rule them all. No more Lord of the Rings, New Zealand jokes, please, Simon.
Although Tim Nielsen did work on Lord of the Rings, so there is like another connection there that you've just made.
Yeah.
Nice.
And in terms of the way we design Strata is whenever you're rendering out files, and we're rendering them into, we're giving them all the UCS names, and we're filling in all of the metadata related to the sounds with the metadata that can be passed by any sound effects tool like SoundMiner, for example. And as you import them into Wwise, we're creating in your sound effects folder the category and subcategory. So inside of your Wwise project, your sound files are automatically being categorized and maintaining order, which means that when you come to reuse them, they're all nicely named with UCS names, with all the metadata that you might need, or metadata that you might add, to say naming it, adding in user data for a project, or user category for a project, and whatever.
And of course, that we believe in this standard and think that it sets a great template for developers out there. You can also subvert that with your own if you have an internal pipeline that requires something specific. Yeah, you can subvert that, but at the core of it is the best intention to promote and adopt a system that has been hardened by professionals out there working with sound files across different media, and really setting you off in the right direction with a standard that is proven.
And super flexible as well. It's
very customizable. Yeah.
So
you can just add a prefix easily as a wildcard only in the render dialog, and you wouldn't have to do that for each file. It would just need to be on one place, and all the files would follow.
Great.
Well, that's the power of Reaper, right? Reaper's essentially like a development platform masquerading as the world's most flexible DAW, isn't it? It's
we have a great relationship with the Reaper folks. They are fantastic in the way that they build flexibility into their door and address any requests that we've fired our way with a verve and enthusiasm that is unmatched, I can say.
But it's also there's the community as well, which I got. I mean, throughout this process of doing this, I definitely became a much more in-depth Reaper user. I've been using it for a couple of years before this started, which was really handy. But I definitely got a lot deeper into the weeds. But there's a Slack community for Reaper users, and you get wonderful feedback, like almost like in record like sort of time, like, oh, I have this, I need to check, like sort of figuring out sort of workflow issues. Can I do this? And they come back to you with wonderful sort of solutions, which is really great. I think that's that. I've also I just wanted to sorry I'm bandstanding and taking the microphone here, but I wanted to also give a shout out to the field recording Slack, which I spend a lot of time in, and they provided over the years just a lot of information and techniques that I sort of absorbed and really sort of put to use through that. And it's just wonderful to be in these sort of like online communities of sound people, and they really they share information so joyfully. It's really like wonderful to be part of, and it really like puts credence to was the Randy Toms made that T-shirt that said like sound people or worse, sort of like a misquote of Obi-Wan's sand people but worse. But it really does make sense, because it's difficult to find better people than sound people.
A great sentiment. Again, I think community at the core of advancing this artistic journey, right? Between people.
Yes. And that physics library is really a testament to that, because we've built that on input from multiple audio directors, years of experience consulting with recordists, with sound designers, with and it's cumulatively become a better collection because of all of that sharing that's gone on between people.
And everyone here today. So again, thanks to everyone here for sharing what's unique about the Strata Physics Collection. It really is a testament to a game audio pipeline first and foremost, but really any sound designer reaching for materials, content around surfaces, objects with consistency, and like an incredible depth of design. I think that's a really cool piece of what this offers. You can grab Strata at audiokinetic.com under the products tab for Strata. We got 2 free samples that you can get immediately your hands on the Reaper project for, and dig into the multitracks across the free Strata sample 1 and free Strata sample 2. I'm excited to say that the physics collection is live. And so if you're subscribed to Strata, go get it. And if you're not, get subscribed so that you can dig into physics across all of these different fascinating vectors of the collection. Again, we've got a step-by-step for you on how to get those free samples and sign up to get news. We roll out collections every month, so we have added a ton of content since last November when Strata launched. And we'll be landing here next week again on Wise Up On Air to go hands-on with Chase Steele and the Physics Collection. We're going to get down deep into those layers. We're going to unpack the Reaper side of things, the Rewise side to put you into Wise from that Reaper project using our Reaper Wise extension. And we're going to talk about some of the new features that we've been rolling out and updates to Rewise and the Reaper Wise pipeline at that time. So I'm tying it up with a bow. And I just want to say thanks again to our guests today. Thanks everyone for arriving with your knowledge and such fascinating stories and insights. Nice work.
Thank you, Damien.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for taking such good care of us. It was a pleasure.
It was easy, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Again, tremendous achievement, pulling all of these pieces together into a symphony of destruction. I again think it's a tremendous addition to a game audio pipeline.
We can't wait for your feedback, and let us know how you're getting on with it. And
Great.
We're very proud of it, and I hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. Florian, Tristan, Simon, well done. We'll see you on the next one, and at double speed next time probably. But thanks again for being on Wise Up On Air.
I could really do with a double speed button.
Yeah, in the next release maybe of Simon 2.0.
Yeah, Simon 2.0. Yeah, probably today. Cool.
All right, folks out there, thanks for tuning in. Great questions. Great to see y'all in the chat, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Catch you later.